Alright, our tradition of having issues with phone calls lately continues. We are still trying to reach the ambassador. I have to search my email to make sure I have the correct phone number. So welcome back to GrokTalk, brought to you by GrokTalk.com and the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers, coming to you every week, or nearly every week, as I like to say, from the CNHT Grassroots Central in Concord, New Hampshire. Find us on Facebook and on Twitter. Just search Granite Rock. You can also listen to this program and past programs on a number of different platforms, including Stitcher Radio, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and others, Spreaker. So definitely plenty of opportunities for you to hear this program and hear our guests, and we try to reach out and get you some very interesting guests if we can. And I'm in the wrong email. I gotta go back. Trying to find these things. Boy, I tell you, it's interesting when you can't get everything to work right the way you want to. Let's see. Looking for guests, looking at email, trying to find out where this is. Here we go. Let me double check this phone number just to make sure that we're dialing the right one. We are. That is the correct number, sir.
Hello? This is Mike Rogers calling from GrokTalk.
Hey, Mike's. I'm listening to Mike talk on the phone.
Okay, we got an echo.
Well, anyway, while I wait for Mike, we did talk about Jim Foley. I wanted to remind you to go to the AFP New Hampshire website and see who's taken the Americans for Prosperity pledge in the state of New Hampshire. It's a taxpayer pledge. You should also check out who's taken the CNHT pledge. I put a post up this week that listed all the folks that had taken it as of that moment, but others may have come on board since then, so you should go take a look, see who's there. I did note that a couple of people that we called out as rhinos did not take the pledge and still have not taken the pledge. Some of them I have specifically asked that we take the pledge. I think Mike has found our guest, so I'm going to skip.
I'm great.
And
ready to go.
We're ready?
Steve,
Yeah.
would you like to bring in the ambassador, please?
I would be happy to do that. Let me just make sure that I have what I need before I do that.
I've read about your book and the review.
Hold on a second. Technical difficulties.
Just waiting for Steve to bring you in. And
I just have to scroll down and find the right thing here.
We'll get with the program.
All right.
Ready?
You ready?
Yep.
All right. Very good. This is, of course, GrokTalk, and we would like to welcome Ambassador Francis Rooney to the program. He was the ambassador to the Vatican under George W. Bush. Ambassador Rooney, welcome to GrokTalk.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on.
Well, I thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. We set this interview up, and I didn't have a chance to look at the book, but this looks amazing. It's called The Global Vatican, and why don't you just tell us about the book briefly and why you wrote it?
Well, I wrote the book because what I found in speaking after we returned from Rome is that the very few people really understand the role the Holy See's played diplomatically in the world of foreign relations, not theology. And many people don't understand why we would ever have a diplomatic relationship with the Church. So I thought if I could write this book, I could explain some of the important contributions the Holy See's made and why their particular form of diplomacy is relevant right now in the world that we're facing. And as well, why it's important for the United States to have a relationship with them.
Okay, well, why don't you give us a couple examples of recent events involving the Vatican that we can start with?
Well, for example, under President Bush, of course, Pope Benedict spoke out so clearly from his unique position of soft power against the global war on terror, struck out against the use of religion as an excuse for violence, and therefore kind of helped leverage the voice of the United States in trying to combat radical Islam. Unfortunately, President Obama hasn't picked that up and used the Holy See's voice, but I think that other countries are calling on the Holy See and for the Pope to go back to speaking up that way. And here just recently, the Pope spoke about the just war theory perhaps applying to the conflict in Syria and Iraq with ISIS. And that has brought about a big call among a lot of nations in Europe to get together to create that community of nations which makes the just war theory apply under the old doctrine and legitimizes a more organized attack on ISIS.
You know, there's so much history there at the Vatican. You know, it's such an epic place to have been. What was it like to be there, and what was it like to meet Pope Benedict?
Well, it was exceptional to meet Pope Benedict for me and for my family. We never thought we'd meet a pope, especially coming from Oklahoma, close to 3% Catholics. But and it was also exceptional to learn from him because he was so smart, so deep, profound, and truly decent. And he has a sincere appreciation for the United States, especially our First Amendment and the religious pluralism that it has bred. And that was really enjoyable. I mean, when he came to the White House in April 2008, he made a speech where he referred to our founding fathers and our self-evident truths, which was incredible and almost parallel to the speech the president made where he quoted the Holy Father. So those two parallel speeches, which I researched in the book, were totally unchoreographed, reflect the obvious alignment and symmetry between the values of the Holy See and those values of the United States.
This is Mike. So Pope Benedict was a very interesting person. I mean, all of the popes have risen up through the church and been elected by the cardinals for a variety of virtues. But I think I can say that Pope Benedict was the first amongst them to be a real scholar, a leading theologian in the field. And he didn't just study the Catholic Church; he studied variations on Christianity. And he had done a treatise many years ago now on liberation theology in general, not just the form that Jeremiah Wright practiced, and and the problems which that caused for the church in Latin America, for example.
Yeah, he was thoroughly schooled up in Father Gutierrez's work and the unfortunate transition of a theology of liberating Catholic people in Latin America to think, which became mutated a little bit into a political movement of getting Catholic people to oppose their government. But and God in the World, you talked about deep. I'm sure you've read that. That's, to me, that was like reading Thomas Carlyle or Kant. It's so profound and deep and inclusive. He is truly the only philosopher pope we've had in certainly in modern history.
Sure, and of course he got into hot water early on, although I think in today's world he'd probably be hailed as a hero. He actually spoke out in Turkey, I think it was, against Islam, or at least against the origins of Islam, and there was a little bit of a brouhaha over that.
Well, yeah, his most poignant commentary about the evil of radical Islam was that Regensburg speech in Germany in September of 2006. And he did get in hot water about that. That's where he used the analogy to Michael Paleologus, the second to last patriarch of Constantinople. And it was really great to be in the Vatican at that time because I heard from the White House and they said, well, go over there and find out if he was serious about what he said and tell him, that he shouldn't back up on it, that what he's saying is basically correct, that the appeasers in the world were all beating down on the Holy See for this very aggressive metaphor that he used. But the truth, and in fact, he was right about what he said, and it's aligned perfectly with where most of the developed world's trying to move in combating radical Islam.
Now, the Vatican was against the war in Iraq, I think Afghanistan too, and or at least they were vocally disapproving. How was that? How did you work with that? I mean, that's obviously a contentious issue between the Bush White House and the Vatican.
Yeah, they were vocally against the second Iraq invasion, but they were mildly supportive of the first one on the basis of the just war theory, and they stayed pretty silent on Afghanistan. But and the reason they opposed it, Cardinal Paleologus came and spoke to President Bush and Condi Rice before they did the invasion, and he said, look, there may be many reasons to take out Saddam Hussein, and we don't like Saddam Hussein either. But the fact is, if you take him out of the government and you don't have something to replace him with, you're going to allow the Shiites to take over and empower Iran to accomplish things they haven't been able to accomplish in the last 10 years of fighting Iraq themselves, and radically increase the persecution of Christians who will be left in the void and when the Shiites take over. And I'm afraid all that happened.
And lo, they did it anyway, and lo, it came to pass.
Yeah, and that's part of the reference to the just war theory now, and why it's so important what Pope Francis said when he referred to the just war theory the other day, because that if you watch what he said very clearly, to apply the just war theory, in addition to the proportionality that you've got to have, which was lacking in Iraq too, you got to have a community of nations in support. It can't just be one or two nations, and hopefully this will breed some type of broader response to ISIS. I think ultimately to really take these guys down, we're going to have the Arab countries and Turkey involved in the conflict directly, and we may be involved technologically but less directly.
Do you think
there's
so that, which leads to the thought, I don't know where quite Steve was going, is there such a thing as a moderate branch of Islam with which we can be aligned?
Well, I think there's a lot of secular Muslims. I mean, you look at Malaysia and Indonesia, there's 150 million of them, and since Regensburg, there have been several conclaves of imams and Arab scholars who've said, we may not like the way the Pope described Islam and the Prophet, but we do recognize that the teachings of the Quran need to be brought into consonance with the 20th century in the modern world. And that's really the rub. How do you get enough Muslims to realize that the world's not going to go back to the 11th century? They have to come into ours.
Do you think, I was going to ask something similar along those lines, but in a different aspect. I think that, how do I want to phrase this? Do you think that some of it isn't so much about the religion as it might be about other member nations in the Middle East being concerned about another powerful military force that could destabilize their government?
Well, I think there's a couple of things in what you're saying there. First of all, I think this whole thing is in part a hegemonic conquest between Shiites and Sunnis.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
It's played out through the metaphor of religion.
Mm-hmm.
And sooner or later they're going to realize, given the debility of the Arab governments, that it's going to be Turkey that probably winds up being the most stabilizing force. That's just my personal opinion. I have some reasons to support that, based on the infrastructure in Turkey, and everybody knows how how the royal family in Saudi Arabia is about to run out of genes. But
yes,
but, when I was in Iran doing some work pre-Iranian Revolution very early in my career, there was no prejudice against Israel, and there were nor Christians, and there were Christians and Jews in the Iranian parliament, the Majlis, but there was a clear hostility towards Saudi Arabia. They looked at Saudi Arabia as a hegemonic opponent and rival, and kind of as an inferior because they're just a bunch of Arabs and this is the Persian Empire kind of thing,
Yeah.
Well, the Persians are actually some of the, give or take the Ayatollahs, are some of the nicest and best educated people in that part of the world.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, for sure. Well, they had a huge middle class. They still have a big middle class. Iran's got a fairly substantial economy, despite all the years of some people like Ahmadinejad trying to ruin it, and even the guy before him, Rafsanjani, fighting Iraq for 10 years, took a real toll on Iran.
All right, Ambassador Rooney, we're going to take a quick break, about 2 minutes, and then we'll be right back. Stay on the line.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
New Hampshire is famous for scenic drives, but they're tough to enjoy when you're on your way to the doctor. Because Obamacare limits your choices, some will have to drive more than an hour to see a doctor. What's health insurance worth if care isn't there when you need it? Jean Shaheen voted for Obamacare, putting your doctors and hospitals further out of reach. Tell Senator Shaheen Obamacare is not working for New Hampshire.
He tried to make us believe he was a fiscal conservative, but State Senator Dave Booten has been deceiving New Hampshire taxpayers. Like a wolf in sheep's clothing, he claimed to be one of us, pretending to blend in, but all along, voting like a liberal Democrat. He voted to raise your gas tax by another 23%, taking a bigger bite out of our wallets every time we're at the pump. And oh, how he drooled at the opportunity to vote to expand Obamacare, which will result in higher taxes and longer wait times in the emergency room. And now the Senate wants to pass a bill to prevent us from criticizing Senator Booten's vote? Call Senator Booten at 603-203-5391 and tell him that we're on to his wolf in sheep's clothing routine. Tell tell him to stop pretending to be a fiscal conservative and start voting like one. Paid for by Citizens for a Strong New Hampshire.
We are on the line with Ambassador Francis Rooney, who was the ambassador to the Vatican under George W. Bush, and glad to have him on the program. My name's Steve McDonald. I'm here with Mike Rogers. We come to you every week from Concord, New Hampshire. Check us out at GrokTalk.com. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter. And listen to this program.
Check us out on all sorts of podcast outlets.
You can't miss us. We're everywhere. Anyway, Mike's question, it's kind of a two-parter. First is, I think that I'm sure your book probably goes into great detail about the importance of having a relationship with the Vatican, and you can probably give us a couple of quick bullet points on that we haven't covered yet. But the other part of the question I wanted to ask is, where is that relationship right now under the current administration, and what do you think about that in general?
Well, first, one of the primary theses of the book is that we're naturally aligned on our founding principles, and we conduct a foreign policy that's by and large principally based. So we have a natural ally with the Holy See, and that coupling their soft power with our hard power creates a bit of a synergy diplomatically in the world. And I know when I was serving, many times we would get the Holy See to say things about different elected officials and governments that sounded a lot better and had more impact because of their non-aligned status and lack of hegemony themselves than when we did it, particularly in places like Africa or dealing with oil-based countries. Now, as far as the relationship, I think it's unfortunate that the Obama administration has been so secular in many ways, and one of them is that they have really had less interest in engaging the Holy See than all of their predecessors, including Bill Clinton. And hopefully that will change now that we see the Pope speaking up a little bit about radical Islam, but it's an opportunity that's lost by the United States, and many in the foreign policy establishment would like to see the same vigor of the relationship that existed under George Bush and even his predecessors that hasn't been here to date.
Can you talk a little bit about the formal return of diplomatic relations with the Vatican that was under Reagan, yes? Yeah,
it was. You know, the book, I went through the whole anti-Catholic prejudice thing, and it culminated, I guess, with President Kennedy's election, and after that it started to recede, and combination of anti-Catholic prejudice receding and the role that John Paul was taking in the world, speaking up against communism, starting with 1979 when he went and spoke at Gdansk shipyard, I think made a pretty compelling case that the United States needed to leverage that voice in opposing communism.
Mike?
No, that's a very interesting period too, and of course, it was Reagan, Thatcher, and Pope John Paul leading and encouraging Eastern Europe to liberate itself, and at the same time putting pressure on the economy of the Soviet Empire. That was how all those countries became freed, and it is tragic today to watch the fecklessness of both this administration and a great deal of Europe in allowing evil to advance and allowing Russia to gradually nibble away at Eastern Europe and to allow ISIS and other bad actors to destabilize the Middle East. We can only hope for a better and more vigorous alliance between the United States and the Holy See in the next administration.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's an unfortunate fact that appeasement has a bad track record in human relations and in international affairs. And as Secretary Rice used to say, when the good state actors fail to lead, the bad state actors are more than willing to jump into the void. And I think we're seeing a lot of that now in the areas you just mentioned.
Do you you mentioned soft power a couple times, I think. Can you go into that a little bit more about the Vatican's influence?
Yeah, soft power is the application of influence and persuasion instead of coercion. And so you try to exert influence by the moral value of your argument and the ability to contact and build bridges with people that are based on a broader understanding than just strictly serving up armaments or doing a covert op. And I think that when that soft power is combined with hard power, it's particularly effective. And I think it's an important thing to have in the world today, where so many of these conflicts are religious and tribal based. And in this secular world that we have here, the Holy See is kind of a unique voice to speak up in these areas.
We are talking to Ambassador Francis Rooney, author of The Global Vatican, an inside look at the Catholic Church, world politics, and the extraordinary relationship between the United States and the Holy See. You talked about morality. I know that there's been some, well, I don't know, do you think the Catholic Church still retains the moral authority that it has in the past?
Well, there's no doubt that these abuse scandals in the developed world took a bit of a toll. But the interesting thing to me is that the area where the Holy See's diplomacy is most valuable, areas where severe abridgments of freedom and human rights are taking place and where you have highly authoritarian governments, they're pretty far removed from the developed world abuse scandal.
Right. And I think since Benedict, the abuse scandals have been pretty well put behind the church. I know some on the left keep trying to resurrect it, but it was, I think, a temporary phenomenon that John Paul began to address. I think Benedict addressed more forcefully, and now I think I was actually sad to see Pope Benedict need to retire, and. Let's talk a little bit about Pope Francis while we have a couple of minutes left, because
Sure.
He's another interesting character with a background in Argentina, which is itself as a country has a history of populism bordering on socialism, and I think the left initially embraced Pope Francis because he spoke out a little bit about the evils of unmitigated capitalism. They thought, oh, great, he's a socialist like us. I don't think quite so much. Would you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the press extracted from Pope Francis's comments exactly what they wanted to do to manipulate him. And if you go back to what he said, and you go back to Leo the 13th and Verum Novarum, there's total consistency that the Church has always been for free enterprise, capitalism, and private property, but you've got to have a safety net for the poor and marginalized. And what's new about that? And what's new to say that the objective of business needs to be satisfying human needs on a broad scale and assuring human dignity and not just making money. I mean, but the press makes it sound like he's some kind of, as you say, radical socialist when he's not at all. And certainly you look at the work he did in the 80s against the Videla government in Argentina, where he stuck his neck out pretty hard, and then the continual opposition to the secularization of the Kirchners. I think the guy's a tough guy, and I think it's exciting to have someone from our side of the world.
I think so too. So, in line with that, and in line with his, direction that basically moral capitalism, and capitalism is in fact the only moral type of economy, that it's interesting to see that the administration here, of course, is clamping down on exactly the kind of moral businesses, like Hobby Lobby, for example, that the church would be applauding.
Yeah, and if we had Pope Benedict in there, he would be speaking about the First Amendment. And I hope that now that Pope Francis has spoken up about the just war theory, he's going to get around to that one as well. Because the effort to combine religion to what happens inside of the building has been an insidious first step by many authoritarian governments for years.
Absolutely. And, it is nice to have the church on the side of freedom. Is it not true, in fact, that through the Middle and Dark Ages that church-run schools, universities, and monasteries were, in fact, the bastions of knowledge and morality that kept everything together, and that the Judeo-Christian tradition is, in fact, what has allowed the family values and capitalism essentially to take root in the Western world and assure our prosperity?
That's right. After the decline of Rome and the chaos that followed it, the people even forgot how to make concrete and how to build the arch. If you look at Byzantine churches, they went back to the flat post and beam construction, which means you can't make it very big because a parabola can be infinitely expanded, and the Romans understood that. That same kind of loss of knowledge continued over into intellectual knowledge, and if it wasn't for Saint Benedict creating the first series of Benedictine monasteries, many people feel that's what kept reading and writing alive during the Middle Ages.
And you mentioned Saint Benedict. Is that part of the reason why Pope Benedict took his name?
I think he took his name because of Benedict XV and the difficulties that Benedict XV encountered during World War I. I think he saw this situation he was seeing in the world of secularism, materialism, and the threat of radical Islam, being similar to what Pope Benedict faced. I mean, he said before he was elected in that conclave that he was going to oppose the dictatorship of relativism or something close to that.
Do you? We're just about the end of the segment. Is there a website? How do people contact you? Where do they get your book?
Yeah, I've got a website, francisrooney.com, and the book can be obtained through Amazon or bookstores. It's on Kindle, and the website gives some of the reviews about the book and a little summary, and I hope people would consider it and learn from and consider the arguments that the book makes about the importance of the Holy See's diplomatic work in the world.
Well, we will definitely put up a link to that, and so people can go check it out and have a look at what you've done. And we appreciate having you on the show today. Thank you so much.
In fact, it's been so interesting. I'd like to see if we can get you back on, and I'm going to try and reach out to my wife's father. He's quite a theologian himself and would be fascinated to hear what you have to say.
Well, he would be a pro in that. I'm more of a intelligence and diplomatic guy, but I'd love to be on your show. It's an honor and privilege to be on here now, and I hope you all have a great day.
All right, you
it's
too.
It's an honor
Thanks
and
so
privilege
much.
to talk to you. Thank you.
Have a good day, sir.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Excellent guest, Ambassador Francis Rooney. You're going to take your headset off? Go ahead.
Well,
I just turned you off, so I'm going to finish the segment. We're going to leave and take a break. And coming up next is Keith Ammon, New Hampshire House Rep. Apparently he's a floterial House Rep, which I didn't even know he had, but we'll talk about that when he gets here. He is running for the State House again in New Hampshire, and that's great. That's what we're all about. This is GrokTalk. I'm Steve McDonald. Mike Rogers has left the building to try to find our guest because maybe he got lost, because we talk about that too. Thanks for sticking in there. Once again, thanks to Ambassador Rooney, and we will be right back.
Senator Jeanne Shaheen said, if you like your current health plan, you can keep it. That's not true, Senator. 22,000 New Hampshire citizens have been kicked off their insurance plans. Hospitals in Rochester, Concord, and Portsmouth, they aren't allowed to provide care under the exchange. Senator, you were wrong in your comments. You should apologize for your misleading remarks. I'm calling Senator Shaheen at 750-3004 and telling her I want my doctor back. You should too.
Paid for by saberpac.org, not authorized by any candidate or candidate committee.
He tried to make us believe he was a fiscal conservative, but State Senator Dave Booten has been deceiving New Hampshire taxpayers. Like a wolf in sheep's clothing, he claimed to be one of us, pretending to blend in, but all along voting like a liberal Democrat. He voted to raise your gas tax by another 23%, taking a bigger bite out of our wallets every time we're at the pump. And oh, how he drooled at the opportunity to vote to expand Obamacare, which will result in higher taxes and longer wait times in the emergency room. And now the Senate wants to pass a bill to prevent us from criticizing Senator Booten's vote? Call Senator Booten at 603-203-5391 and tell him that we're on to his wolf in sheep's clothing routine. Tell him to stop pretending to be a fiscal conservative and start voting like one. Paid for by Citizens for a Strong New Hampshire.
Few things are as important as finding the right doctor. And under Obamacare, that's harder than ever. Over a third of our hospitals no longer available. Our doctors no longer covered. Fewer choices, longer drives. No state has been harder hit than us. And even after watching it impact New Hampshire, Congresswoman Ann Custer still supports it. Call Ann Custer. Tell her Obamacare isn't working for New Hampshire.
Grok TV.